Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bourbon Bites Whiskey Reviews with a gaming twist. I'm Clifton, and welcome to a very special early stream. I know some of you are getting your notification now. You're like, why is he live 3 hours early? But I always am willing to do this when we have a very special guest like we have here tonight joining us very, very soon. Do you want to give a couple shout outs before we get going here? We have several patrons already here in the room. I appreciate y'all showing up this early for this stream. We also want to give a shout out to our mods, the Linux Cat, Donnie. What's up, Donnie? Good to see you. We have a few other mods that may join us later in tonight. Emily Chambers, I saw here earlier too. She is our newest mod, so glad to have her. A few Patreon shout outs, of course, to Fred Gilbert, Adriana Rodriguez, Don Nishida, of course. A few patrons that aren't here, but they're probably watching the replay. Aaron Blum, Spencer Dewar, Wesley Zeller, James Taylor, Todd Cooper, Brian Brennicky. I appreciate all of you guys. If you're watching this, if you're watching the replay or you're watching live and this is your first time, that I do have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel in any way for as little as $2 a month, you can click the little button over there. I pinned in the chat. So you can support the show there. And of course, with super chats throughout the night, if you want to get your question answered by our very special guest. Of course, I'm reading everyone's chat, but if you want to make sure that your question is read, super chats are always appreciated. They really do help out the channel here. With that, I do want to say a couple things, a couple announcements up front. I will not be doing a live stream on Saturday. I'm actually doing a very small socially distanced meetup with a couple people from the channel, but also local group friends too. So we will not be live on Saturday. However, I will be uploading a review of two really, really special whiskeys from Bardstown Bourbon Company. Very, very excited to get into those. Really cool stuff they're doing there. I also want to say that our after party hangout that is normally right after my stream on Thursday nights, since we're doing a little bit early, I don't want to get the party started too early. So so we will be doing that at 7 p.m. Pacific. So basically what time I normally start my stream. Just head over to our Discord server, which if you guys aren't part of the Discord, you can go check it out, bourbonbites.com. It'll redirect you there. We do lots of hangouts there, do a lot of gaming, lots of really cool stuff there. So definitely check that out. So just all the announcements are out of the way first. So without further ado, I want to welcome our very, very special guest of the evening, Will Schragis from Barrell. Welcome, Will.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I mean, I'm really excited to have you. I was talking to you a little bit before, but I actually haven't had anything from Barrell on my channel other than one pour, which I just saw Patrick Starkey came in the room. Patrick Starkey is one of the patrons of the channel and also a good friend. He sent out samples to a bunch of my viewers for my New Year's Eve countdown, and we had a sample of the New Year's Bourbon 2020, and we did it as a toast, as an end to 2020, and I will say, that was probably one of the best things that came out of 2020 is that whiskey. So congratulations on that one.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Patrick, for being so generous with everyone.
Yeah, Patrick's awesome.
The New Year Bourbon is, and I'll talk about the brand a little bit more, but sure. It's interesting that it's a project we've done 5 times now. And when we started putting it together in October and November, in such a crazy year, there was this sort of comfort in the sense of normalcy of oh my God, we have to blend something out of so many different distilleries in such a peculiar, it wasn't any different. We were all locked in the distillery the way that we would have been.
Right.
It wasn't a pandemic. And so usually we send it out with this big boisterous, things are amazing. Happy New Year, everyone. And this year it was a little bit more somber of we found some comfort in doing this thing. Let's celebrate making it through.
It's a way to leave 2020 with on a positive note.
But anyway, I think that we are pretty solidly a medium-sized whiskey producer now, and we're about 7-8 years old. And so I'm glad that you liked the little bit you've had, but hoping to show you a little bit more. We're really turning this corner where we're hoping that we're a bottle that shows up on pretty much any whiskey drinker's bar pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it everywhere out here in Southern California. I just haven't had a chance to really explore it. So I figured what better time to do it than with you here on the show.
Here we go.
Awesome. So I guess one question I like to ask every guest I have on the channel, what we do on my channel is a kind of a mix of whiskey and video games. So question, are you a gamer or were you a gamer when you were growing up? Just curious.
Yeah. So gaming is... I don't have an exact answer to that because the boring answer would be no. I don't game a lot right now.
Sure.
But at moments in my life, I have played video games a lot. And like anything that is a really big part of your life and or an addiction, I still get cravings for things. And so there are days that I'll go on eBay and I'll be like, how much would it cost for me to buy an account for like the first ever quest to go play for a little bit?
Oh, wow.
Or like, I'm going to see if I can dig up Elder Scrolls Morrowind for a second. But I moved around a lot for college and grad school, and I never had a video game system. I was never a computer gamer.
Gotcha.
And I never really got into things on my phone or anything. And so I have recently started playing hockey video games a little bit again.
Oh, interesting.
But I'm more interested in the franchise part of it than the playing other people part. So I love participating in conversations with gamers. We have a woman that works for us named Jessica in Texas, who's a really big gamer. And I love talking to her about it and like trolling her a little bit about getting her amped up about stupid things that I would do in role-playing games. But the short answer would be no, because I bet I'm in a conversation with a lot of gamers right now, and I would not be able to hold my own.
Oh, no, don't worry about that. So I actually talked to Jessica at the Repeal Day Expo. Because everyone told me I was at the Barrell booth, which for those of you that don't know, this was like a virtual expo. So like we weren't actually there in person. It was just our little 3D avatars. But I went to the Barrell booth and I said like, oh, what my channel was. And everyone's like, oh my God, you have to come back in like 3 hours. Jessica loves video games.
Right.
So I actually met her there, which was really cool. But yeah, no. So most of my viewers aren't gamers. I've come to realize that. I consider myself a gamer, but only in the fact that I enjoy it, not that I'm good at it. So a lot of what I do on my channel is classic, like Super Nintendo, like NES games. So that's always kind of my specialty, because that's what I grew up playing. Those are my favorite things to play. So even though I say it's a gaming channel, it's still more of like a remember that game from your childhood kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of how I feel. Like I think I could still probably do most of the moves from Mortal Kombat.
Yes. Yeah. We didn't have that game. We did I had a bunch of other whiskey channels on a while back ago, and someone's favorite game was the what was the knockout game on Super Nintendo? It was Mike Tyson's Knockout, I think it was called.
Right.
And then he played like 3 levels of that while we just watched him in awe, as he's just like, and he hasn't played this game in like 20 years, but he's still kicked ass at it.
One of my favorite random memories from and I know it came up. I think I'm a little bit older than you, but we're about the same age.
I'm 27, so
is playing a Game Gear when I was a little kid.
Game Gear. Wait, what is that?
Game Gear like lost the battle to Game Boy, but it was color and it was big. It was like this big, and I loved it. So I played Sonic on Game Gear. That was like my parents would give it to me in the car to play.
Gotcha.
But one of the reasons it was a problem was it just tore through AA batteries. It took 6 at a time, and you only got a couple hours to play out of it.
Man, that must have been huge. I recognize the name, but I think I was just so in the Nintendo world, I didn't get into that. I didn't play Sonic growing up at all, which is weird because like everyone loves Sonic, but I never had a Sonic game.
My mom told me that there were times where we'd be in a long car ride or taking a plane, and she would have to bring like 24 AA batteries because like the only way to like keep me satiated was the Game Gear, and it just like would tear through batteries so much. And so
that's crazy.
Anyway, I digress. You asked me a question that I like to talk about.
Yeah, well, don't ever say, I think everyone is a gamer in some aspect, whether you playing games on your phone or whatever, as long as you just enjoy, passing time, doing something like that. I consider everyone a gamer. Well, cool. Well, let's go ahead and get into the whiskey. Let's go ahead and pour something in our glass while we talk. I just poured a little bit of the Barrell Rye Batch 3 to start us out here tonight. So is that what you're starting with as well?
That is what I'm starting with as well. I'm going to pour a little bit more because I find myself drinking this one quickly. I think I should probably start with talking about Barrel.
Well, first I was just
a little bit, right?
Well, I was going to actually ask about you. How did you find yourself at Barrel?
So I met Joe Beatrice, who's the owner and founder of Barrel. Still works for the company full time. Everything that leaves our warehouse is still signed off by him.
Right.
As our portfolio gets bigger and bigger, I think one thing that keeps it unified is that we still have a single vision for is this part of it or is it not part of it? Mm-hmm. And so for me and Nick, who's our single barrel program manager, and Tripp, who's our chief whiskey scientist, like whatever we do is still like, okay, I'm trying to get this as good as I can before I bring it to Joe, and Joe says yes or no. Sure. And that system seems to work really well for us. I met Joe when he was a one-man operation selling bourbon batch number 1, and I was the buyer at a store called Zacky's in the suburbs of New York City.
Oh, wow.
And I was the second store ever to buy Barrell Bourbon.
Wow.
And
So wait, was he doing it like on his own at that point? Like just
yeah, technically you're not allowed to self-distribute, but he didn't have a distributor, so he was doing all the delivery and using a clearinghouse. And we ended up spending like 2 hours just chatting about whiskey.
Mhm.
And he told me like that day, like, by the way, like you're gonna work for me one day. And fast forward like a year, I had left that job and I was working for a rum importer representing mostly rum agricoles, and managing the East Coast and Texas for them. And we had stayed in touch, but he got back in touch with me and was like, I know that it's sort of a conflict of interest and like you're an honest person. I'm not going to ask you to consult for me, but can we go to Whiskey Fest together? Like I'll buy you the ticket and can we just taste and we'll talk about the whiskey and who's representing it and stuff. And so we saw each other every once in a while just to sort of check in. And then in 2016, he said, we have enough stock now. We have our footing in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and a couple other states. Like, I'm ready to be a national brand. You want to do it? And as a 26-year-old at the time, to have someone say, like, I want you to be the single person representing this whiskey brand besides me in the entirety of the United States. By the way, everything's expensive. We only do cask strength, and you get to launch a new product every month. Pretty big, yes.
Exciting, but intimidating, I would imagine.
It was really intimidating, and there's a lot of flying by the seat of your pants. But I think that when you're a company that is really focused on innovating and sort of breaking the mold, you have to put people in place, myself, but also really our whole sales team and our production team and Nick and Trip and like everyone who is good at shooting from the hip and figuring out problems instead of like, this is how I did it at my last company. Because everything we do is a little bit different from anyone else.
Oh, go ahead.
Good. So I guess Joe found me, and I had come from fine wine. I had worked in spirits a little bit, but I mostly was a wine person. And that lends itself well to complicated products, but it was definitely a learning experience for me about what types of people drink whiskey and what they want from whiskey producers. And so now, unfortunately, my job is a little bit more sending passive-aggressive emails to distributors and logistics, but I get to do a lot more in product development. And then I also feel like I had 4 or 5 years just on the road talking to people about whiskey. And I'm a baby for my job, but I also feel like my entire adult life has been like entrenched in this company, making it bigger. And so it like really feels like I'm part of it, which is amazing.
And you mentioned, I mean, the company is pretty new. Am I reading right that you guys started in 2013? Like, and you joined in 2016, and it's a small team, right? Like, you guys only have a few. Like,
so the company is about 25 people total, but that is HR, bottling, blending, warehousing. The sales team is 5 people. So we have, I don't know, I bet someone's watching this from the sales team. We have Eva, who is our Northeastern Senior Brand Development Manager. She was the first person besides me on the sales team. She's based in New York, but she does essentially the whole East Coast now. Not really Florida, but everything above Florida. And then any state that is a control state that we're launching into, she's our sort of like bureaucracy specialist for them. And then on her team is a woman named Lindsay, who is the beverage director of the William Vale Hotel before us. And so she's definitely a product specialist, and she's been great. We have a woman named Stephanie who's based in Colorado who manages like all of the states that you don't know where they are on the map. Like 14, more than half of the geographical.
Not knowing where half of them are.
And she came to us from William Grant, so she like had a lot of experience with high-end whiskeys, and she's wonderful. Jessica in Texas, who's like, don't mess with Texas, gamer, like a road warrior. We really love her.
Jessica. She seems like really, really cool.
She's super cool. And then a man named Ned, who's based in Kentucky, who probably has the most complicated job on the sales team because he is there. So not only does he have his own sales run in Kentucky and Tennessee, but he is helping out in the distillery all the time and like running whatever weird favors we need locally at the same time. So he is this like dual job. And so, yeah, it's like we're a really tight-knit team. We all come from different parts of the industry or not the industry at all. We're probably on the phone. Everyone is on the phone with each other probably once a day. And so even though it's regional managers, it's sort of like, what do we got to do together to get it done?
That's awesome. Well, I guess you mentioned earlier that you guys, Barrell is all about innovation. So you guys aren't really you don't describe yourself as a distillery, right? Because you guys mostly specialize in the blending aspect of things, right?
Yeah. If you look at like the legalities in America, we're a distillery and a rectifier, but we don't distill anything from grain.
Right.
At one point when Joe was launching the brand, the idea was, I'm going to blend whiskeys until I can invest in distilling my own. And every couple years we've taken a look at that. But as we grow, any sort of putting a real plan in place gets bigger and bigger, because you can't build a small distillery for a big brand. You have to build a big distillery for a big brand. And as we've grown, we were one of the first. It was like sort of High West and then us, to be very upfront about, like, we are making things that are greater than the sums of their parts. We're respecting the people that are making really good whiskey in America, and we want to be a partner to them. And this model exists in other countries and in other industries, and like, we're going to do it really well here. And so now we have this portfolio that's like old cask strength whiskeys. So when we've got a couple $1 million to invest, like, we don't want to invest in a still. We want to invest in like 1,000 10-year-old barrels to use.
Right.
And so we've kind of turned the corner now where, like, we have no intention on being our own distillery. If you had interviewed me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said by 2021, I think we'll be distilling. But we do have some small stills that Trip uses for experimental things. And then occasionally we'll produce something that we need for blending, like we'll redistill something. But our distillery partners are up to in the 70s at this point with distilleries we work with around the world. And so to us, that is the expansion we want to do. There's a lot of people making really good spirits in the world, but we just want to work with all of them.
Yeah. Well, you said, like you said, there's other types of like Scotch. There's these, bottlers that are doing their own blendings and things like that. So was that kind of the inspiration behind starting Barrell as a brand?
Well, in Scotland, it's interesting. Scotland and America, there's really 3 different. This is getting into the nitty gritty a bit, but it seems like you've got the crowd that wants that.
Oh yeah. They appreciate the small details.
There's like 3 different business models for people that are not distilling everything themselves. There's what America would call a non-distiller producer, and that's a company. And I mean this all in a good way. Then I have no judgment for anyone that falls into any of these categories.
Sure.
But that's a company like Redemption or like Bullet,
right?
Where they're a brand. They're not saying they're bottling other people's things. And they may actually even move on who's producing for them, but their specialty is in like communication and branding and distribution and follow-up. And so those companies are saying, we make whiskey that we're proud. We like get whiskey that we're proud of, and we're really good at talking to you about it. And we are outsourcing the production completely to someone else.
Sure.
And that's not your business.
Right.
And those brands garner a little bit of bad press in America because a lot of them are not really forthcoming about the fact that they're doing that.
That's I mean, I'm totally on board with like brands that source, but when they're not straightforward with it and they kind of are shady about, they had this backstory.
It's like, don't just tell me the truth is how I feel. A lot of people
have backstory about their grandfather's recipe, but like, no, you're sourcing that. Like,
right. That's I know who you're talking about, and yeah, they got slammed for it, and they deserve to. The second is what people would call an independent bottler, and that is someone who is sourcing casks usually, and bottling them under the provenance of the place where it was distilled. So Gordon MacPhail would be a really good example of that. Single Cask Nation, I think, is probably the best American company doing that right now, because they're not only working with Scotch distillers, but they're working with people all over the world, and they're being extremely forthcoming and transparent about it. But the point of that is them as a curator or them as a selector. And so you're not really buying a Single Cask Nation whiskey. You're buying a, Macallan Single Cask Nation whiskey. The third, which is the most complicated, which is where we really fall in, is what Scotland would have called a merchant bottler, which the first and most famous is really Johnny Walker. But there's a lot of companies like that now. And I think the newest one and the one that we consider a cousin the most is Compass Box.
Oh yeah, I love Compass Box. I haven't had a rep on from them, but I've tried a lot of their whiskeys on the channel. They do some really cool stuff.
They're really cool. And what Compass Box and what we are saying is, we source barrels from all sorts of people. We source distillate, we source young distillate, we source old distillate, we source things that we think are good by themselves. We source things that are gross but make good ingredients. But we don't want you to be appreciating what we make based on the places that it was made. We want you to be appreciating what we make based on what we bring to the table. And the fact that we are not going out and outsourcing our production, we are outsourcing ingredients, much like a cheese cart in a restaurant. Just because you have a good cheese program doesn't mean that you make good cheese. but you still have to worry about the presentation and are you treating it correctly, and is it fitting its place, and is it priced correctly, and all of that.
Exactly.
And so transitioning from the independent bottler model to the merchant bottler model took us a minute, because the first couple batches were all of the barrels came from one place. And then starting with batch number 7 in 2016, we started blending things together. Batch number 7 in 2016 was the first of our bourbon releases to win best bourbon in the San Francisco Spirits competition.
Oh, wow. And, so you were like, we're onto something here.
One of the reasons that it did that, I think, was because we took older bourbon and declassified it down into a 6-year-old. And that's just not something that most companies are willing to do. And it's delicious. So if you look at a lot of the batches that have this sort of secondary lore, a lot of them are the ones with younger age statements. And it's because they were older. There was older whiskey or older bourbon declassified into it. Gotcha. And that is a painfully expensive way to deal with old barrels, but it makes for really, really good bourbon. So we don't always do it. The one we're tasting tonight, 26, is a 9-year-old, so we didn't declassify it that far. There's as old as 14 or 15-year-olds in it, but not. It wasn't declassified super low.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, well, the babes of bourbon say, as long as companies are upfront, is all we care about. All we care about is the taste. Then, well, great transition into tasting this batch 3 rye. So tell us a little bit about this. So you guys. This is basically a combination. So this is a combination of Indiana, Tennessee, Poland, and Canadian rye. That's really interesting selection. How did you guys come about that?
So this is the 3rd batch of rye that we've done. And we also do single barrels, both from Indiana and from Canada. But the impetus behind this was to take the 95.5 mash bill from a gigantic distillery in Indiana, which I'm not going to say the name of out loud, but
we got you.
For everyone who thinks they know what I'm talking about, you're right. That is such a classic flavor profile, and we wanted that to be the driving force behind this, but we didn't want to just be bottling that in a batch. And so we had this sort of come to Jesus meeting about, like, what do you wish rye was in America? Because rye in America is like amazing for cocktailing and delicious, but it is such a tight canon because of how expensive it is to produce, and also because the rules are very, very tight on rye. In fact, someone could argue they're almost more tight on rye than they are on bourbon, because rye as a flavor grain has so much to give, and you by law have to cover it up with new oak. Whereas like corn as a flavor grain kind of needs the oak. But rye does. There's not a ton. There's some good, but there's not a ton of really exciting corn whiskey out there that doesn't see a lot of virgin oak.
Sure.
There's rye whiskey from all over the world that sees all sorts of different types of barrels, and it's delicious. So we had already from Rye Batch 2 and some other projects we were doing this 100% malted Polish rye. It's a single malt whiskey from Poland, but instead of barley, it's rye. So it's double pot stilled. It's like a very imagine like a Scotch forward, but out of rye style whiskey.
Yeah, everyone in the chat, they're like, Polish rye? What? Oh, that sounds fun. Everyone's excited about that one.
Everyone's always asked me, like, what is Polish rye like? And like, I don't know the answer to that. I know what that particular rye was like. There's no category for it. Similarly, we had some barrels that were out of Tennessee that we had used in some other blends that were just sort of test batches from some distilleries in Tennessee that we showed up the barrel. So we used those as it's a very small amount of those. The big impetus behind this was taking the Polish rye and blending that cereally sort of overripe mango-y malty character into it without ruining the mouthfeel of the virgin oak in the Indiana rye, and then also blending some older, I think it's up to 14-year-old Canadian ryes that have that very like appley white flowers, fermented honey sort of thing, and are done in used oak. And so there's very little wood tannin on them, and using that to kind of strip out the oak domination from the Indiana rye. So the hope with it is you get everything you want out of what would otherwise be like a very high proof, awesome Indiana 95.5. But then like, if you care to smell it and taste it and think about it, there's like a whole world of other stuff to find in it too.
Oh yeah. Well, I think what I was getting on the nose is I got that kind of floral aspect that I don't typically associate with, because I'm a big fan of Indiana rye. Don't get me wrong. I've had plenty of it on the channel here. But it on the nose, it's a little bit sweeter and a little bit more, I guess, earthy, I would say a little. But I'm getting that, and I'm wondering if that's from those other types of rye that I'm at least less familiar with.
I think it's from that, but it's also that when you have bourbon and rye and other 100% virgin oak distillate, there's often things in that distillate that are very difficult to find because the tannin and the sweetness and the like lignin and vanillin from the oak is so there, it's really hard to notice. So it's like there's a lot of wine, for instance, that is extremely oaky, and actually there's really beautiful terroir driven or vintage driven fruit quality to it, but you like lose it because of how oak driven it is. There's a lot of American whiskey that like you put on the rocks, you put a little bit of water in, or you let sit for a little while, or you drink enough that you start to ignore the oak by accident or on purpose, and you find all of this complexity in it. And there's this like shame with rye, I think, that rye as a grain has so much to give. And it's a more complex, more interesting, more flavorful grain than corn is. And yet we have these rules about rye with new oak, which should be there. I'm not saying that we should get rid of them,
right?
But it's very difficult to find rye in America that doesn't abide by those rules, because that's how you have to make rye in America, and that's what people expect. So what's interesting about this whiskey is a lot of people who drink whiskeys from all over the world tell us that this is like their favorite thing we've done. People who are rye drinkers are like, it's cool, but it's weird.
I wouldn't say weird. It kind of goes a different direction than you'd expect when you taste it. I just actually recently had the Alberta Premium Cask Strength Rye, which finally made its way to the States, and that one just blew me away. There's so much. I don't know for sure. I'm assuming they're not using new oak. I don't know for sure, but I didn't get much oak influence on theirs. So I'm seeing kind of where that's taking this one. I think it takes it. I almost want to say it reminds me of like if gin was released at cask strength, I'm kind of getting some gin kind of notes on that. Is that weird?
No, I think that
not the juniper, but like
no, but it's that gin has a lot. Gin's a white spirit that has a lot of flavor, and so to think about an aged spirit that is not oak driven, I would totally say that is a thing. There are notes that are really defined in gin, especially sometimes it's like they're blended in compounds, and to find notes like that in a whiskey means that it's a really singular, interesting whiskey.
Absolutely.
And it certainly is herbaceous the way that a gin would be.
Yeah, I'm digging it. It's different, but I mean, I'm a rye fan, so I love trying new, different expressions of rye. I do want to give a shout out to our first super chat here tonight. Mr. Whiskey Shits says, "Cheers, cheers to you, Mr. Whiskey Shits." I still giggle every time I see that name, but cheers. And like I said, if you guys have questions, sorry if I missed in the chat. You guys are very chatty tonight. But any super chats that come through, of course, I will absolutely feature during the show. Yeah, so I'm a fan of this rye. So are you like, when you're drinking whiskey, like, do you gravitate more towards a rye or a bourbon? Like, what's your favorite?
I am really an equal opportunity drinker.
Okay.
I both because my career has like gone from wine to rum to whiskey.
Gotcha.
What you're left with is favorites from different places, and also like people you want to support and things that are nostalgic.
Sure.
But also that at Barrell, we do so much weird cask and interesting cask finishing, and then we blend from so many distilleries that I end up tasting so many different things with or without a reason to taste. It's like, okay, we want to try this, or how do we feel about this thing? That I think what working for a company like Barrell forces you into is you're interested in everything, but you are not really interested in boring stuff. And so I for a long time was like, okay, when I'm working, I'm drinking really fancy whiskey, and when I'm not working, it's like I love Wild Turkey 101.
Okay, that's actually a question I was going to ask you later on. I always like to get people a little drunk before I ask them what they drink when they're not. So yeah, you're a Wild Turkey fan.
But so what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years is like I drink everything when I'm working, and when I'm not working, it's like I want to drink like well executed, tasteless Italian white wine, or like mango White Claw or like sake or
no dissing on the White Claw here. I'm a big fan.
I'm not. What I'm saying is,
although I like the black cherry over the mango, but that's just personal preference.
we could buy a mixed pack together.
Yeah, there we go. We can split it.
you always want to hang out with people who like the other things in the mixed pack.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I really dig the rye, but I think it's time to move on to something else from you guys. And I think this is what you guys are known for the most, which is Barrell Bourbon. Or at least your namesake. I mean, I think are you guys officially Barrell Craft Spirits or officially Barrell Bourbon?
So Barrell Craft Spirits is the official name of the company now, but a lot of people know us as Barrell Bourbon. Bourbon is like our bones.
Sure.
And the way that we put whiskeys together is still the way that we put bourbons together to start. Mm-hmm. And we joke that bourbon is our vodka because it sells itself and it keeps the lights on. And so at any given moment, we might have 4 or 5 or 6 core items, plus God knows how many single barrels and private releases. Right. But half of the things that are going out the door are still Barrell Bourbon batch blank.
Gotcha. Real quick, before Chris was asking, I was drinking the batch 3 rye, yes. So just want to answer that before we moved on.
Also, for Chris and anyone else, we sold out of batch 3 rye today, which is interesting timing. So there's still plenty in our distributors' warehouses and on retail shelves. You
guys buy it up. That's your warning. Go for it.
This is the last call moment of whatever you see in the market is what is there. We no longer have any more to replenish anything. And there will eventually, I hope, be a rye batch 4, but we have a new whiskey coming out that we can talk about later in April, that the base of it is a blend of Canadian and Indiana ryes. And so we're temporarily pausing the rye batches while we are able to really talk about that whiskey too.
So y'all know what that means. Y'all go buy that up because you know that's going to be sought after once it
also means you're going to have me back in a couple months when I have a new whiskey for you to try.
Would absolutely love to have you back. I mean, we're only 30 minutes in, but I'm having a great time so far. So we're drinking the batch 26 bourbon. Now this one's 112.64 proof. What can you tell us about this batch?
So batch 26 is a minimum 9-year-old. I believe there's up as high as 15 years old in this.
Okay.
It was blended in October of last year, the very beginning of October. And batch 25 came out in the middle to the end of the summer. And it was the first time we had ever used a wheated bourbon in one of our blends.
Oh, interesting.
And so, again, batch 25 was one of the ones that had older whiskey declassified into a 5-year-old. And it sold out like immediately because of that.
Wow.
And so batch 26 came, and the whole business plan, the like sports jacket, not cool part of my job where I was like, Trip, Nick, Joe, batch 26 needs to be big enough so that it can get us through the end of the year without having to relaunch another batch. It's October. We can't do another one.
Sure.
And everyone was like, great. Okay. And they started blending barrels and they were putting barrels together, and they got to this moment where Joe called me and he's like, psych, it's perfect. That's it. And it ended up being a pretty small batch based on a set of 9-year-olds, some of which are a really high rye mash bill, and some of which are this like were up in the top of the rick house for a while, so like really opulent 9-year-olds, and then some 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds that we use a lot that are over oaked and they bring backbone into things, so they're like pretty bad barrels by themselves, but amazing ingredients. So we vat them together, and then this vatting that Nick, who is our single barrel program manager but sits on the blending team, also really put together that we call the secret sauce, which is 14-plus-year-old Tennessee bourbon barrels that came out of the barrel at less than like 103 proof.
Oh, wow.
And so they are insanely easy to drink.
Yeah.
And they take otherwise very flavorful and interesting things that are too harsh or assertive, and they just like make them easy to drink. They don't. It's not. The secret sauce is not a good bourbon by itself. It's too simple. But it's old and simple, and it's not super high proof, and it's simple, and it is our way of being like, we nailed the flavor profile, and now we need to like nail the body and the drinkability side of it. And the secret sauce has become that. It's like that's the first step. Is like, let's add a little secret sauce, see what happens.
Gotcha.
Like the pickled jalapenos of whiskey. And so that is really what made this batch work. Is it was so loud and delicious, and then it was like reined into a complete whiskey by that last older ingredient. And that's why the proof is pretty high on this, but it doesn't read so much like that because it was a little higher, and that last component sort of brings it into what feels like a sort of round, complete whiskey.
Gotcha. And that's funny you mentioned that. Actually, like I said, I'm reviewing Bardstown Bourbon Company for Saturday. I was just reading over their press releases. They do a similar thing. They save that older stock to blend in at the end to add some like roundness, to add that little oak element. They take what's already a good whiskey and then bring that in. Because like you said, on its own, when you overage something, it's not going to be that great,
right.
But it has its purpose, and that sounds like what you guys are doing there too.
Mm-hmm. But what's interesting about that project is when we identify barrels that will work for that vatting, we pull them out of wood because we don't want them to get any oakier.
Sure.
And so we have a stainless steel tank full of this, like, we know what this will do when we need it component.
Wow, sorry, I just took my first sip of that. That's fantastic. So keep going, sorry.
Yeah, and so I guess like I didn't really mention it, but like the two foundations of our company are we are concerned with making the best whiskey we can at any moment, the best spirit, because we do rum also. We're not at all concerned with being able to make it again or with making the same thing. So there's a few releases we do, like the Dovetail, which we're about to try, and Armida, which I'll probably talk about, but I know you don't have there yet. That we revat them from time to time, and we do that to taste, and we do that to, is this the best we can make it? So they do change a little bit.
Okay.
But all of the batches, like, we start from scratch, and we're like, what's the best thing we can make at this moment? The second foundation of our company is no questions asked. Everything is at cask strength.
That's fine with me. I'm a bit of a proof whore. I call myself a bit here. So I love cask strength releases.
that came from Joe. It was his favorite way to drink whiskey before he started the company, was tasting cask strength barrel samples.
I was going to ask, is that kind of inspiration for the name? Because I heard the name, I was like, well, it sounds like such an innovative name, but you got to think about it. Like, is that where that came from? Tasting straight from the barrel?
Yeah, where it really came from is when Joe was looking at, he knew what he wanted to do conceptually with what type of whiskey he wanted to put together and how he wanted to talk about it. But he had all of these different name ideas, and every time he'd ask people, half the people would hate it, half the people would like it. And he finally got to this point where he was like, I just want a company that has no bullshit. And so, again, this is not a really sexy way of describing it, but Barrel with 2 L's is a very easily search engine optimized misspelling of the word barrel.
Are you targeting the people that are going to misspell it, or the people that are looking for it?
Either way, but it's like, you can control that name. It's a name, and the 2 L's looks really good on the label.
It does.
And it really was like, Joe was like, everything about this company is going to be utilitarian and systematic, and so the name is going to be what we need in a name, which is recognizable, looks good on the label, doesn't need an explanation, and search engine optimizable, which in 2013 was a big deal for a whiskey company. At this point, everyone's playing that game, and it's a little more difficult. But and so there isn't a story. It is no one's uncle's middle name.
Well, that's a good sign. I did have another question. I asked on my Patreon earlier today if anyone had any questions. Adriana, who's actually also here, she asked, is there like a certain flavor profile you guys aim for between the batches? I know you said the batches are all different, but is there like a signature barrel flavor profile you guys look for?
There's not a signature barrel profile that we all look for. And really every time the meeting starts with, what do we want to do? What's the best thing we can make? And then as we're blending it, it a little bit creates itself through trial and error of what are we going to do today? But there definitely, if you taste our whiskeys, is a house style or a house preference, because Joe and Tripp have put together every one of the bourbons, and Nick and I have been around for a long time. And in general, our company likes that slightly more umptious, fruit-forward style of bourbon.
Literally, the first thing that comes to mind when I sip this is fruit forward. So that was my one note. You stole it from me.
And so I think that there is a unifying characteristic, especially between the batches of bourbon, in that they are generally pushed in that direction if the choice is offered. There are bourbons that are like very vegetal and earth driven and dusty. And there's notes of that, I think, because we use barrels that show that way quite a bit. And there's single barrels that we release that we really like that about them, and they become single barrels. But with the exception of a couple batches that I think were a little more savory, most of what we do is this like really juicy style of bourbon.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really pairs nicely with the cast strength, because a lot of times when you see cast strength stuff, you do see the older, super oak forward, which, don't get me wrong, this is oak forward, but there's a lot of like fruitiness. Like it's like it's not quite cherry. I'm trying to place like what fruit I get on the front of that, but really, really sweet, almost like a cooked cherry pie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or like maraschino cherry.
Yeah,
like
a
cherry
sweet,
pits.
yeah, like super sweet, not necessarily the dark cherry that I sometimes get. Really like a candied kind of note on the front of that.
If you know the taste of like almond cookies, that like they almost taste like cherry at that point, that like Di Serono kind of taste.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I feel like that's what
I
I get a lot.
Yeah, I can get that for sure. I mean, I still think, again, these are older whiskeys that are going into this. I like older, I tend to gravitate towards the older releases. So I'm loving that bit of oak that's combined with that. Super. I mean, honestly, like I said, never had Barrell before this stream. So very excited, other than the New Year's release. So I'm really, really enjoying this one. I think it's super well balanced in a way that, some older single barrels, while I love them, they can't be that balanced.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to ask, so you guys have a single barrel program. So how do you guys, pick what's going to be a single barrel versus what's going to go into a batch? Is it like the off profiles or like the ones that really stand out? Like what makes you guys pick those?
So we have a single barrel program. In order for a barrel to be identified as a single barrel program, it has to be something that Joe and Nick and Tripp feel is in balance as a complete whiskey by itself.
Okay.
So when we warehouse in a lot of different places. But we have our own facility where we do blending and bottling that holds a couple hundred barrels, at least more, really. And so as things come in, they get like very quickly checked. And if it's something that we feel like will be a good single barrel, we do what's called chalking it. We just like mark the barrel. And so it stays in its group, but it's chalked. Then as we're putting a blend together, or as we're going and looking for single barrels, we know which ones to go to first, and they sort of get pulled out. And so there's certain sets of single barrels where there's a set of barrels and they're sorted between this percentage of them are vatted and used as an ingredient in bourbon, and this percentage of them were chalked and we still feel are good single barrels, and they're single barrels. Mm-hmm. And then there's some single barrels, like there's a series that's just getting released soon. It's being bottled next week, actually, that we call the Z1 series, which is all of the single barrels that start with Z1 and then they have another letter and then they have a number. So it's a 4-digit code. And those are chalked barrels from batches 24, 25, and 26 and 27. So there's everything from 5 to 11 years old in that. And there's Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, many different distilleries.
Do you guys do you guys reveal like what's in the single barrel or no?
We'll reveal what state it was distilled in, sure, and the age.
Okay, that's mostly what I meant. Like, you're not just gambling. Is it Tennessee? Is it Kentucky? But you tell them that. That's awesome.
What we are doing, because there's about 90 barrels in the Z1 series, is we are giving preference to the groups and liquor stores that want to taste them blind.
Okay.
So if you know that there's many options in that series and you are down to pick your favorite without knowing what they are, it's not that you have to buy the one that you picked. Some people taste through them, they pick a 5-year-old, because everyone always picks the 5-year-old when it's blind. But then they say, our customers really need something that's older. Our second favorite was this, and we say that one's 8, and they say, okay, we'll take the second one.
That's so disappointing.
But,
I get it.
What it is. Like, everyone's business needs to do what's best for their business, and I respect that. But for people who want to cherry pick, like, this is the category I think I want, mm-hmm, they get to wait for the second round. The people that are down with all of it are getting the first round from us, and we're sending out 3, 5, 10 different options for some of those people. And so what we're hoping is a lot of barrels coming onto the market from us where someone said, like, I tried many different styles of bourbon and this was my favorite because of me. Mm-hmm. And it's been really interesting for us, first of all, to see what people pick, and also to see what people thought they wanted and what they end up picking, and then to see who is so good that they identify something that we weren't allowed to tell them. And it doesn't happen often, but there's a couple of people in the country that have tasted so many single barrel offerings that they're like, I like this one for this reason. And
sounds like Sugar Kitty Store, the comment that featured out here, did a similar thing. They're like, we know where this is from, so we're just going to tell you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting, because I mean, I was, go back, 6 months ago, I was one of those people that I was like, Yeah, if it's a Tennessee whiskey, it just doesn't do it for me. But I will say, I picked up a bottle of the Bottled and Bond George Dickel from last year, the 11-year one, and I was like, holy crap, this changes everything that I think about Tennessee whiskey. So I think that's like people have their preconceived notions. Like, I mean, I was one of those people. I was like, I don't like Tennessee whiskey, but I'm like, you know what? If you try it going into it with an open mind, you may realize that it's probably really good, if not your favorite. Like you said, a barrel pick.
Yeah, and also sometimes there's preconceived notions for good reasons, but sometimes they're for bad reasons. And sometimes it's like you have an idea of what you like, but it's not necessarily everything you like. I grew up in New York City. It was very hard for me to live in California because I'm just like, I cut people off. I wear a sports jacket, doesn't mean I didn't make a lot of great friends.
I'm not from California, so I moved from South Carolina, so I'm Southern at heart.
No, but my point is just like, I still had a great time out there. I still made a lot of good friends. It's not like I hate people from California, but it's like, I had a hint that I was going to end up in New York. And I agree. It's like, there's certain categories of whiskey that I like more, and I'm more prone to like those single barrels. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to love things that come out of a place that I didn't. I don't find myself drinking a ton of Irish whiskey. I had the Jameson 18-year-old release recently, and it blew me away.
Oh yeah, that actually, you know what? Funny enough, I tried that at Disneyland. Like, of all places to try a like expensive Irish whiskey, I tried it at Disneyland, and I fell in love with it too. I haven't bought a bottle. I'm on the Redbreast. I'm kind of on the Redbreast train right now, but that 18-year from Jameson is really awesome. I did want to mention there's a comment from Fred, which I featured here. Fred's a patron of the show. He says on the single barrels, he's heard that there's a way to identify the mash bill from Tennessee, low rye versus high rye. Is that something that you guys put on the label, or is it just something that the store that picks it may know?
So our single barrels have a 4-digit code.
Okay.
And baked into that code are hints for us internally, so that when me or someone on the sales team gets asked, what do you think of barrel N137? We have an answer, because that's a ridiculous thing to ask a salesperson who has been working with 200 to 400 barrels that year.
Right.
The D series, anything that's a single barrel bourbon that starts with a D, was a high rick aging barrel from Tennessee. Okay. And anything that starts with a, let's see, I have my browser open so I can make sure that this.
I just want to share the whole chart. I can feature it on the screen, but we'll keep that a secret.
Anything that starts with an H,
okay,
is a high rye mash bill. It doesn't mean that if it starts with another letter, it doesn't fall into that category. But the H series were single barrels that were picked out of Bourbon 24's base, which was high rye. And so all of the ones that went into the H series came out of a set that was 100% high rye. That being said, like, when you're talking about cask strength 9, 10, 13, 14-year-old bourbons, if you can find me someone who can identify mash bill tasting cask strength bourbons at that age blind, we have a job for them.
Yeah, there you go. If you guys are watching the
chat, there's things that might give you a hint, but there's just so much going on from the aging and from the wood and from temperature fluctuation, humidity fluctuation, altitude, toast level, char level, curing time, all of those things that at that point are going to be so much more impactful to the flavor than was it 8% rye, or was it 15% rye, or was it 21% rye, or was it 36% rye? What mash bill really does is it sort of sets the stage for the moments in a whiskey's life where the distillate is really speaking.
Sure.
And it affects fermentation quite a bit. And so mash bill to me is more of a conversation in the 2, 4, 5 year range. And as you get older, yeah, it's important, but it's not. It's an easy talking point, and so people still talk about it, but it's not. It's not the answer all the time.
Gotcha. Well, I guess since we are getting close on time, we got to talk about this last expression. I mean, I believe this is your best-selling product, if not the Dovetail series. Tell us about that.
So Dovetail is in 2020 was our best-selling product. It started as a little bit of a passion project. It is a whiskey that's a blend of 3 whiskeys, an Indiana whiskey, so not a bourbon. That is finished in Dunn Cabernet barrels. Dunn is like one of the most well-respected, old, family-owned Cabernet producers in Napa Valley.
Oh,
They
wow.
sit on Howell Mountain, which is in like the far northeast corner of the valley.
And no, I'm not from California, so I'm not going to pretend to know where that is.
Anyway, we made this whiskey. There was the whiskey finished in those barrels, and we loved it, but it was really abrasive. And so we took 2 other projects we were working on that were blended to be blending components because they were just pushed too far into the opulent zone. And they were both Tennessee bourbons. One is finished in late bottled vintage port pipes, and the other is finished in blackstrap molasses rum casks. So we used those to blend into Dovetail. We released it in December of 2018.
Okay.
2019. Anyway, we made 600 cases of it, and we released in December, which is the worst time to release a new product. If anyone ever wants to start a whiskey company and piss off a bunch of distributors and retailers, try to launch a whiskey in December. And it sold out immediately. And we had thought this is going to be like a thing that no one knows about, and in 4 years it'll be on some auctions, and we'll say "told you so." But it's like everyone who tried it was like, "This is so good." And so that was the moment where we had to figure out how do we synthesize the idea that we are not concerned with recreating anything with we want to make Dovetail again. And so the final consensus was we will make all 3 ingredients the way that we always make them, and we will blend them to taste without knowing what the proof is every time. So that the ratios are different every time. And depending on the time of year, the finishing is going to be a different amount of time in each of the wood. It's blended to taste. And so on the Dovetail bottle, I think you got samples, not full 750s, right?
Yes, I'm not sure which batch. It's the 124.7, if that tells you anything.
Right. It doesn't off the top of my head.
Okay.
Although I believe on our website you can look that up. But if someone has a full bottle themselves, which looks like this, although the colors changed a little recently, we call this the spline, the place where the 2 colors meet themselves. And there's a little number all the way on the right side. And that'll give you... I
can zoom in for you if you want to show like specifically where that is here. Let's see.
Can you see the 6?
Wait, where is it? It's below the Dovetail? Or... I don't even see
all the way on the right side. It's the 3rd to the end.
Wait, it's in the little... Oh, that's like an Easter egg. That's awesome.
So we love Easter egging into our labels. If you look at our labels, most of them have something hidden in them somewhere.
Awesome.
And it's usually because the way that things are registered, they wind up being the same product legally. But if there's a difference, we want to be able to look at the bottle and figure it out.
Sure.
And you can do that through barcoding, and you do that through sort of glass encoding and chip encoding. But we just think it's fun to just Easter egg onto the label.
That's awesome.
My favorite Easter egg we ever did was we have a whiskey called the Infinite Barrel Project that we bottled on Halloween one year. And so we Easter egged the 0 in 2018 into a pumpkin for only that bottling.
Oh my God, that's so cool, man!
So there's like 200 cases of Halloween.
So I know a store that has had that on their shelf forever, and I've never picked it up. I almost went today to go get it before the stream, and I was like, but now you make me really want to go and see if it is that special Halloween bottling, because that sounds so cool.
Unlikely, because that was a while ago, but
again, they've had it on their shelf for a while, so
you never know.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of different YouTubers chiming in. First of all, I said Whiskey Crusaders Will. Whiskey Crusaders is an awesome channel here on YouTube. They said we've gotten a few bottles of Dovetail now. And of course, Jason from the Mash and Drum, another awesome YouTube channel, says Dovetail is my favorite barrel release. So damn good. So you got a lot of fans here on the Whiskey Tube.
Yeah, to be honest, Jason, too often I feel like the new thing is my favorite thing. But I look at the way that Dovetail is recognized now, and also when I'm tasting it against our portfolio, but against other whiskeys too. It is such a unique, specific flavor profile. And it's been around for more than 2 years now, and people know the name Dovetail, and it is the whiskey that I am most proud of that our company has done, because I feel like it no longer is this special release from us. It is like a whiskey that exists in the world of whiskeys. We now, as a company, if someone says like, "Oh, I like your brand, like what should I get?" We say like, "Get a batch of bourbon and get Dovetail," because you get to see like what is the history of our company, what is what we do. We are a bourbon producer, and then like, what's the best example of why we're different, and it's Dovetail as a product.
And Dovetail, so it's still considered a whiskey, because that's something that people were asking. Like it's not labeled as a whiskey, but you guys, it's still considered a whiskey legally, right?
So all of the ingredients of Dovetail are straight whiskeys.
Okay.
The issue with Dovetail when it was originally made, and the ruling has actually changed on the labeling laws now, but because we had to do it when we did, it is that because there was more than one state and more than one finish from different states. We got pushed into a category called distilled specialty spirits, which is also where like Angel's Envy is and a couple other whiskeys. And that was because no one knew what to do with us, because we were being upfront about the fact that like this whiskey's finished in this barrel and this whiskey's finished.
Right.
If we had said we blend them first and then we finish them, it would have been American whiskey, I think, would have been the category.
Gotcha. And there's even some debate with, people that are doing their top 10 lists. Like some people say, do we include finished whiskeys? Like there's a debate internally with YouTube too. Like it's like somewhat like not a new thing, but it's like really surging between.
Yeah. And I don't really have a position on that, because there isn't a good word for it. Finished whiskeys is a weird category because all of them are done in such different ways. I think what is important to us as a company is if we are finishing a bourbon or a rye, we declassify it into whiskey. Because we feel that even in moments where you can get away with it, that sort of violates the spirit of what bourbon and rye and American rye are.
Yeah, and like you said, I've never thought about it that way. Most people are concerned about saying bourbon finish, but by saying whiskey finish, it kind of loses that stigma.
Well, we have this product, Armida, where we do say bourbon whiskey finished in pear brandy.
Okay, and that's actually what I was going to ask you. That's your newest release is coming out soon, or is it?
Yes, it's out. It was allocated and still is sort of allocated, although it's coming into full availability into March. It takes us about 6 months of finishing to make this, and so what we laid down in October-ish will be available in March, and it'll be more available. Okay. Like Dovetail, it's a blend of 3 different whiskeys, although all 3 of them started as bourbon. They were finished separately in Jamaican rum casks, French oak pear brandy casks, and Sicilian Amaro barrels.
Interesting.
And so for this one, like to us, this is a whiskey. It is not Barrell Bourbon Armida. It's just Barrell Armida. But unlike Dovetail, where one of the ingredients is a whiskey and the other 2 are bourbons, all 3 of the ingredients for this started as bourbon. Seagrass, which is the third, the one that is going to be rye-based, is Indiana rye, Canadian rye, and Indiana whiskey. So again, we won't call it a rye, even though most of it was a rye at the beginning of its life.
Sure. So it's a similar thing where you finished it in a bunch of different. What is Seagrass finished in?
Seagrass is Martinique rum, so it's a rum agricole finish. Although we are respecting the denomination of origin in Martinique, and because it's not bottled there and not a rum, we're not saying agricole on the label. Malmsey Madeira, which is the sweetest, sort of most opulent of the traditional styles of Madeira, and apricot brandy.
Oh, wow. So interesting. You guys change it up depending on, the spirit that's going into it. That's really interesting. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on the show to talk about that one. That sounds really, so you said March is what you guys are targeting for
March, April. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I did have a question. I did see in the chat, people are debating, people are checking all their barrel bottles real quick. Are all the Dovetail bottles labeled with the little hidden code or no?
Everything starting with, I think, the 4th vatting has the code.
Okay.
What we had before that is up here on this bottle is a D.
Okay. Well, I know Will from the Whiskey Crusaders, he posted his bottle, and I just verified it doesn't have the number code on it. So Will, check your bottle, see if what it has. Just want to answer that question because I know everyone's super curious now.
If it has a number on the top, that means it was a 1 or a 2 or maybe a 3.
Okay, he said, "Oh, that's it. I've got it."
Okay, so I think then, Will, you have the 4th vatting, which is the moment that we were told we couldn't put it on the top anymore because they said it was misleading as an age statement, which is ironic because everything in here was 10 years. Everything in the bottle was 10 years old, but they thought we were trying to say it was a 3-year-old on top, and it was before we started Easter egging it. So there's one vatting that has no number on the front label. It does have an Easter egg on the back label, but I'm not going to tell you where it is.
Oh, well, you gotta check that one out. Well, again, I know we're running out of time here. I know our friend Perry on This Is My Bourbon podcast has a very special guest tonight from Bourbon Pursuit. So once we're done here, y'all go check out his, if one of the mods in the chat, Donnie, I'm not sure if you have the link to Perry's stream, put that in the chat. But Will, I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Of course,
I've
thank you so
learned
much for
a lot
having me.
about Barrel. I've never really I've been a bit intimidated by it. I forgot to mention this earlier. I was always intimidated because y'all have a lot of releases. Like, and we talked about a few of them, but y'all have so many other ones. And just as a consumer, I was like, I don't know where to start with Barrel. But doing research for tonight's stream, I realized you guys have it all laid out on your website. So I encourage anyone that's also confused like I was, check out their website because they are super transparent. And I love that about you guys.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, well,
and to answer that question, I think that like the best way to start with us is first of all with Dovetail to sort of see an example of what we do, and all of our releases are vetted by Joe in the exact same way, and so our bourbons are, even though they change with every batch, it's the same group that's saying this is the best thing I can make right now. It's almost like a seasonal restaurant.
I didn't give any notes on the Dovetail other than it's very, very good. That rum, I think, is the biggest influence on, at least for me. That's what I'm noticing. It's really rum forward, but not in an overwhelming way. I've tried some other rum finished spirits that I didn't really love, but this one's really balanced with that whiskey. Like you said, it's not necessarily like a rye or a bourbon. It's just an American whiskey that you guys are using as the base, right? Yeah, so it's. I mean, I think this is really great. I mean, you said you don't have a favorite. You don't pick favorites, but I'm assuming you like the Dovetail too.
Dovetail's the one I'm most proud of. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's the one I'm most proud of. Gotcha. Anyway, I know I've kept you guys late, so I don't want to.
No, it's all good. And again, you're welcome anytime. I would love to try on the channel the new releases that you said, the Armida and the Seagrass. Am I saying that? Is it Seagrass?
Yeah, the two of us should talk with Aaron, who I know set this up, and we should find a time in April or so for me to come back.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you back. And again, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. It's been a blast. And yeah, so thank you guys for watching. If you want to see more Barrel, let me know in the comments below, or if you're watching the replay, #replay squad down below. Let me know what Barrel products you're interested in me trying on the channel. And let me know if you want Will back. Of course you do, but just let me know, let him know that you want him back on the channel. Well, cool. Cheers, Will, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And have a wonderful evening.